There is something almost mythic about the way people talk about The Simpsons. They do not merely say the show guessed right. They do not merely say the writers were clever. No. They say the show prophesied. They say it foresaw. They say that somewhere, hidden behind yellow skin, a suburban couch, and the eternal cry of "Doe!" there is a secret chamber where tomorrow is drafted before the rest of us have even survived today. But let us begin honestly, because honesty makes the mystery even stronger. Even people connected to the show have said that many so-called predictions are coincidences, educated guesses, or jokes that later seemed uncanny. And fact-checkers have repeatedly shown that many viral Simpsons predicted this images are fake, altered, or wildly overstated. That truth does not weaken the legend, it deepens it. Because the real wonder is not that the show had a crystal ball. The real wonder is that it understood human beings so well that satire kept colliding with reality. And that is where the story begins. Not with magic, not with sorcery, but with pattern recognition. With writers who watched politics, technology, celebrity culture, corporate greed, public absurdity, and the glorious incompetence of modern life so closely that they kept stumbling into the future. When a show lasts for decades, when it throws thousands of jokes into the air, some will land with startling force. But some of them did more than land. Some of them struck the ground like lightning. And when that happened, again and again and again, the audience did what audiences always do when coincidence becomes too dramatic. They turned it into folklore. One of the most famous examples, perhaps the example that transformed The Simpsons from a brilliant sitcom into a kind of cultural oracle, was Donald Trump. In the year 2000, the episode Bart to the Future aired. In that episode, Lisa Simpson becomes president and says she has inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. At the time, that line felt like a joke stacked on top of another joke. Trump was a celebrity businessman, a tabloid fixture, a symbol of gaudy excess. The idea that he would become president sounded to many people like the punchline of a civilization losing its mind. And then, 16 years later, he won the presidency in 2016. Even writer Dan Greeny later said the line had been intended as a warning to America. Think about that. A joke written for absurdity became, in the eyes of millions, a documentary fragment from the future. That was the moment many viewers stopped laughing comfortably and started staring at the screen a little differently. What made the Trump moment feel so chilling was not simply that the name was there, it was the tone. The show did not present a Trump presidency as triumphant, noble, or orderly. It presented it as a mess Lisa had to clean up. That is what made people shiver. Because it was not just a name tossed into the air. It was a scenario. It was the image of a country waking up after spectacle and discovering the bill had come due. And whether one agreed or disagreed politically, the broader point remained undeniable. This cartoon had reached into the realm of what seemed ridiculous and found a future that history was still preparing. Then there is the Disney and Fox story, which feels less like a prophecy of politics and more like a prophecy of empire. In a 1998 episode, viewers saw a sign that read 20th Century Fox, a division of Walt Disney Co. At the time, that was a sharp little corporate joke, a wink at consolidation, a satirical nudge suggesting that giant entertainment companies might someday absorb everything in sight. But then Disney announced its acquisition of 21st Century Fox in 2017, and the deal became effective on March 20th, 2019. Suddenly, what had looked like a throwaway gag became one of the cleanest, eeriest images in the whole Simpsons legend. The joke was no longer just funny, it was archival. It was as if the show had sketched the silhouette of modern media power long before the merger lawyers finished the paperwork. And what is fascinating about that moment is that it reveals the real genius of the show. The writers did not need supernatural powers to sense where the culture was headed. They needed only sharp eyes and no illusions. They understood that corporate appetite rarely shrinks. It expands, it devours, it rebrands. It turns yesterday's rivalry into tomorrow's division. So when viewers saw that 1998 sign after the real-world Disney-Fox deal, it did not merely look clever. It looked like a satire that had outrun the people it was mocking. Then came technology, that endless carnival of promises, misfires, and human dependency. In the 1995 episode Lisa's Wedding, The Simpsons showed a future in which people used wrist-based communication devices and video calling. Years later, audiences would point back and say, "There it is, the smartwatch, the video chat call, the future on your face and strapped to your wrist." Now, fact-checkers have noted that the smartwatch claim is overstated because advanced wrist communicators had appeared in science fiction long before The Simpsons. But the episode undeniably predated the consumer age of FaceTime and the smartwatch boom that arrived much later. The eeriness, then, is not that the show invented the concept from nothing. It is that it embedded these now familiar technologies inside everyday life before everyday life had fully caught up. It imagined a future in which intimacy itself would become screen-mediated and wearable. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling kind of accuracy. Not inventing a device, but correctly sensing how ordinary it would one day feel. And then we get to one of the funniest and most revealing examples of all. Autocorrect. In 1994, a bully on the show tries to write "Beat Up Martin" on an Apple Newton, and the device hilariously mangles it into "Eat Up Martha." At one level, this was simply a parody of the Newton's already notorious handwriting recognition problems. The joke was rooted in a real product flaw, not clairvoyance. But years later, former Apple engineering leader Nitin Ganatra explained that the "Eat Up Martha" gag became a kind of internal warning during development of the iPhone keyboard. In other words, the joke did not just predict our autocorrect misery, it haunted the people building the technology that would define it. That is a deliciously strange loop. A cartoon mocked a clumsy digital future, and the real engineers of that future carried the mockery with them, like a ghost in the lab. So the prophecy there was not mystical, it was cultural. The writers recognized something fundamental very early. Humans would increasingly surrender language to machines, and the machines would embarrass us. They understood that the future of communication would not arrive as sleek perfection. It would arrive with mistakes, substitutions, humiliations, and the comedy of technological overconfidence. Eat Up Martha endures because it does not merely resemble autocorrect. It captures the emotional truth of it. Then there was voting technology. In a 2008 episode, Homer tries to vote for Barack Obama, only for the machine to keep switching the vote to John McCain. Years later, in 2012, a Pennsylvania voting machine was reported to be changing a vote for Obama into one for Mitt Romney, and NBC confirmed the machine had been taken out of service. Again, this was not supernatural foresight so much as savage intuition. The show understood that when democracy meets badly designed machinery, the result can become absurd, frightening, and darkly comic all at once. The joke worked because it hit a raw nerve before the nerve was publicly exposed on video. And perhaps that is why these predictions feel so potent. They are not random. They grow out of anxieties we already carry: corrupt systems, fragile technology, spectacle replacing judgment. When reality later produces a scene that resembles the cartoon, the resemblance feels like revelation, but it is also recognition. The Simpsons often saw the pressure points first. One of the most intellectually startling examples lives in the realm of science: Homer and the Higgs boson. In a 1998 episode, Homer is shown in front of a blackboard with an equation that science writer Simon Singh later said almost predicted the mass of the Higgs boson. 14 years later, in 2012, CERN announced the observation of a new particle around 125 GeV, consistent with the long-sought Higgs boson. Was Homer Simpson literally doing frontier particle physics on primetime television? Of course not. But what makes the moment so astonishing is that the equation was not meaningless scribble. It came from mathematically literate writers and consultants who smuggled genuine ideas into a mass-market comedy. So when viewers later looked back, they did not see random symbols. They saw a sitcom that had been playing with serious science so intelligently that a gag blackboard became part of the prophecy legend. That is a crucial part of the story. The Simpsons was never just crude cartoon chaos. Buried inside the jokes were writers with strong backgrounds in math, science, culture, and politics. The show's predictive aura depends partly on that hidden sophistication. The future often belongs first to people who can read systems, and The Simpsons had system readers disguised as comedy writers. Another notorious example comes from the world of Las Vegas illusion and animal danger. In a 1993 episode, a tiger attacks a Siegfried and Roy-style magic duo, Gunter and Ernst. Then, in 2003, Roy Horn was critically injured during an onstage tiger incident that ended the famed act. This example remains one of the most eerie because of the visual similarity and the sheer specificity of the scenario. It was not merely something bad happens in entertainment. It was a famous big cat magic act suffers a tiger attack. That kind of precision is exactly what keeps the legend alive. And still, even here, there is a deeper lesson. The joke landed in 1993 because the act already symbolized a glamorous flirtation with danger. Exotic animals on stage were always thrilling, always risky, always one heartbeat away from chaos. The writers did not summon danger into existence. They recognized that danger had already been built into the spectacle. The prophecy was hidden inside the performance from the beginning. The Simpsons merely pulled the curtain back. Then there is Lady Gaga. In a 2012 episode, an animated Gaga swoops through Springfield in a high-flying performance spectacle. In 2017, the real Lady Gaga headlined the Super Bowl 51 halftime show in Houston, delivering exactly the kind of aerial, theatrical, larger-than-life performance that made viewers once again say, "The Simpsons did it." Was it a frame-by-frame prophecy? No. But it was another case in which the show correctly understood the destiny of a public figure whose brand was spectacle, height, drama, costume, and pop grandeur. The cartoon version and the real version rhymed because both emerged from the same truth. Gaga was always headed toward a platform that massive. Sports also fell under the yellow shadow. In a 2010 episode, the show depicted the United States defeating Sweden for the gold medal in men's curling. At the Pyeongchang 2018 Winter Olympics, that is exactly what happened. Team USA beat Sweden to win its first ever Olympic curling gold. Curling, of all things. Not football, not basketball, not some giant mainstream sport easy to build jokes around. Curling. That specificity is why the example feels so wild. The show took a niche international sport and landed on a real future result 8 years early. The longer you sit with that, the stranger it sounds. And then, because the universe apparently enjoys showing off, there is Cypress Hill and the London Symphony Orchestra. In the 1996 episode Homerpalooza, a joke suggests Cypress Hill accidentally booked the London Symphony Orchestra, possibly while high. For years, it was one of those wonderfully bizarre Simpsons bits people remembered precisely because it seemed too ridiculous to happen. And then, on July 10th, 2024, Cypress Hill really did perform with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. Nearly 3 decades after the joke aired, life leaned over to animation and said, "Fine, you win again." That one is so delightfully improbable that it feels almost designed to keep the myth alive forever. But now we must speak of the shadows around the legend, because every myth attracts imposters. Not every so-called prophecy is real. Viral images claiming The Simpsons predicted Trump's death, or a bridge collapse, or the coronavirus pandemic in the exact form shared online have been debunked. Reuters and Snopes have both documented examples where screenshots were doctored, AI-generated, miscaptioned, or taken wildly out of context. Even the famous 2020 pandemic meme was inflated beyond truth. Writer Bill Oakley said the coronavirus comparison was a stretch, and the show did not literally predict COVID-19. So part of understanding the Simpsons prophecy phenomenon is learning to separate the eerie from the fake, the sharp satire from the photoshopped fraud. That too tells us something profound. People want the prophecy to be true so badly that they manufacture extra proof. They take a real legend and overfeed it. They turn coincidence into cult, satire into conspiracy, comedy into coded revelation. But the real examples are strong enough on their own. They do not need fraud to be fascinating. In fact, the debunking makes the genuine cases stand taller. Because once you throw out the fake screenshots and the counterfeit episodes, what remains is still extraordinary. A comedy series so observant, so relentless, so tuned to the absurd trajectory of modern life that it kept stumbling into tomorrow with embarrassing regularity. So what are we really talking about when we say The Simpsons prophesied the future? We are talking about a show that understood that politics would become spectacle, that corporations would grow monstrous, that technology would become intimate and error-prone, that democracy would be vulnerable to absurd failure, that science would seep into pop culture, that celebrity would become ever more theatrical, and that reality itself would increasingly resemble parody. The prophecy was never just in the details. It was in the diagnosis. The Simpsons recognized that the world was becoming cartoonish, and then the world, offended but obedient, began proving them right. And that is why these stories still grip people, because beneath the laughter is a whisper. What if the funniest show on television was funny because it understood us better than we understood ourselves? What if every ridiculous scenario was built from a truthful reading of our appetites, our vanity, our greed, our inventions, our media worship, our short attention spans, our political delusions, our hunger to be entertained even as the walls shake? Then the Yellow family in Springfield is not just a sitcom family. They are witnesses. They are archivists of the absurd. They are comedians standing on the edge of tomorrow, squinting into the fog, and calling out shapes that the rest of us are still trying to name. So no, perhaps The Simpsons did not possess a mystical scroll, a demonic pact, or a portal into destiny. Perhaps there was no secret temple of prophecy behind the writer's room door. But something almost as impressive was there. Intelligence, memory, satire, nerve, and the willingness to push a joke just far enough that history might someday trip over it. And time after time, history did exactly that. Trump, Disney and Fox, video calling, eat up, Martha, broken voting machines, the Higgs boson, a tiger attack, Lady Gaga in the sky, Team USA curling gold, Cypress Hill with the London Symphony Orchestra. One by one, the so-called impossible became footage, headlines, and cultural déjà vu. And maybe that is the final lesson of the Simpsons prophecy. The future does not always arrive wearing the robes of destiny. Sometimes it arrives wearing a cartoon grin. Sometimes it arrives as a joke that stopped being funny because the world insisted on reenacting it. Sometimes prophecy is not a miracle at all. Sometimes prophecy is simply what happens when satire watches civilization long enough, takes careful notes, and refuses to blink. This has been a Sharri Plaza presentation. Thank you for watching.